What's up YouTube? This is Nitro. So I got a comment asking me to talk about enchantments. So I guess I'll do so in this video, and I'll go over, what enchantments are good for what type of characters. And as usual, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability. So I'll talk about my current enchantments, the ones that I'm using, and then I'll talk about, the other ones that can potentially be used and so on. So let's just get started. So with Leon, Leon's enchantment that I gave him was Rough Sea. The reason is because he very frequently uses his skills, right? Most of his attacks utilize, for me anyways, I very frequently attack with his assault skill. So Rough Sea, which when attacking with a single target skill increases his attack by 10% and reduces the damage taken, is pretty good. Another option for Leon, which is very, very good in fact, is, let me just bring it up here in the Forge screen, is Full Moon. So what Full Moon does is when the hit point is above 80%, all offensive and defensive stats increase by 10%. In fact, Full Moon can be used by almost every character that you have, because plus 10% intelligence or attack and plus 10% defense and magic defense is useful for practically every character. So Full Moon is great, but given that you have very limited scrolls, you might not be able to enchant everyone with Full Moon. So that's why I did not give Leon Full Moon at this time. I may actually change Leon to Full Moon once I get my final sets of equipment, but right now he is using Rough Sea. So in addition to that, for every item that I gave him, I tried to make it so that he has adding on attack, because he's all about attacking. So his weapon, the Last Knight, gives plus 20 attack. His armor gave plus 3% attack. I didn't get rid of this one because the other stats are amazing. Plus 11% defense, plus 16 magic defense. So I wanted to replace it, but with these kind of stats, it's very hard to change. His helmet gives 4 attack and plus 5% defense. And then finally, his assault ring gives plus 4% attack. So there's a bit of plus attack for every single item. I did have to use, multiple enchants before I would get plus attack, but I think it's worth doing so. So that is Leon's setup. Next is Basel, and Basel would be the same as Lana. For me, they're both currently using Clock. So what Clock does is when you use a skill that does damage, you have a 30% chance to decrease cooldown by 5. So that basically refreshes the skill if it triggers. The reason I give it to Basel is pretty obvious. He has AoE attacks, he has Dark Reaper for damage, and he also has Sleep, which actually does some damage. So Clocks would trigger for all of these skills. It would not trigger for his faction buff, of course, but doesn't trigger for any faction buff. And it would not trigger for summoning. But summoning is just for PvE, for like grabbing treasures and so on, so it's a very, very rare skill. So given that's the case, Clocks was quite useful to Basel, especially when it triggers Sleep. Or when I'm facing the Ice Dragon, for example, if it triggers on Dark Reaper, I can use it a second time for added damage. So using Clocks does add a certain element of luck to everything, I have to admit. But I felt like overall, for the current utility, it's pretty good. Your other option, other than Clocks, for magic characters is actually, and it's very blatantly named, the enchant that is called Magic. The reason for that is you give up the chance of being able to use your skill a second time or even possibly third time because of the cooldown reset. But what this skill does is it increases skill damage by 10%. And if it's an AoE, it increases it by an extra 5%. So AoE attacks get an additional 15% damage, and regular single target skills get an additional 10% damage. So Clocks is another great enchant. There's not much to say about it. Whether you choose Clocks or whether you choose Magic is up to personal preference. So that is the two enchants really for any Magic user. Magic or Clocks. And which one you choose is really up to you. So for Lana, I had also given Clocks. And just a quick note for Basel. Basel's talent makes his intelligence 1.5 times his magic defense. So I tried to give all of his equipment plus magic defense. So there's 2% there, 4% here, 3% here, and then a great 7% over here with plus 5 magic defense. So that's Basel's enchant. In the case of Lana, it's just pure intelligence. So 4 int, 6 intelligence there, 4 intelligence here, and 7 intelligence over there. So yeah, you can get higher stats, but I felt like this is just it's hard to get very, very high stats, and gold being the rare resource that it is, it's not worth endlessly enchanting, I feel. So next up, Ledin. Ledin is my tank, and tanks actually have the most variety in enchants that they can use. In my case, I gave my Ledin, he currently has Hard Rock. So what it does is it gives defense plus magic defense 5%, and then in addition, when hit points is below 50%, you have a chance to restore 15% of your hit points after the battle. As I'm getting higher, early on, it was definitely very good. As I'm getting higher and higher level, I'm finding that this is starting to fall off. Because usually my Ledin gets 2-shot regardless. So Hard Rock is not really as good as it used to be. For example, if your character can survive potentially 3 hits, then Hard Rock would be perfect because it has 2 chances of proccing. But now that my character is likely to die in the second hit, Hard Rock just never really activates ever. So moving on, other than Hard Rock though, as I said, tanks have the most number of enchants. There is Hard Rock, there is Ice. Ice has a 20% chance to freeze the attacker. And that means when the attacker is frozen, they can't retaliate if you attack them. So it's only a 1 in 5 chance, but when it procs, it's very, very useful. It's like a free stun on the enemy character that attacks you. So there's Hard Rock, there is Ice, there is also Thorns, which has a 30% chance to reflect damage taken this time by 50%. So Thorns can do some damage back to the opponent that attacks you. Again, this enchant seemed like it was very, very powerful early on when characters had very low hit points. But now that even the enemies you're facing have high hit points, Thorns has become less and less useful. And then the other option as well is Steel. Steel increases the character's hit points by 10%, which makes them more survivable, and also decreases the damage they take by 10%. So Steel would make your character tougher as well. The final option actually for Ledin is actually you do 2 sets of defense and magic defense increased by 5. So by doing that, let's say I would do 2 rock enchants, and then I guess, let's say 2 crystal enchants. So I get 10% additional defense and 10% additional magic defense. And the bonus for that, for Ledin, is that his skill, Divine Guard, replaces his attack with the total of his magic defense added with his defense. So by increasing it by 10%, you're actually increasing his attack value as well. And increasing defense and magic defense makes the character tougher too. So that's actually a very good option for Ledin. And it's an option that I am seriously considering changing to, since Hard Rock has become less and less useful to me. So that's the setup for your tank. Multiple options. Tank it's all just personal preference. So let's move on to my melee infantry, which is Bernhard. Now Bernhard is one of those characters that can do almost anything because he himself is very versatile. He can be your melee DPS character. If you give him, let's say, the general skill with Iron Fist, then he can be your tank because he can equip Lava Titans. So it's really hard to say which enchant you would use for Bernhard. Personally speaking, because he's such a generalist, I just gave him Full Moon. That way, as long as he's healthy, he gets plus 10% attack, plus 10% defense. So that was my choice. It simplifies things, and I don't have to worry about it. Now, we'll go over to Liana, my healer. Healers are actually quite interesting. Healers, now the most obvious one, and the one I gave Liana, was Crystal, which increases her healing by 20%. But that is not the only option. In fact, what I'm seeing more and more is, and what I'm considering changing to, by the way, is rather than healing via crystal, you can give your healer the skill that's called Tree of Life. So what Tree of Life does is it increases the defense and magic defense of all heroes within 2 blocks by 5%. So again, you're increasing the defense and magic defense of your characters, so they become tougher. They take less damage, so there's less need to heal. And more importantly, again, for Ledin, increasing his magic and his defense and magic defense by another 5% would increase his attack value. So Tree of Life is another option. You do not have to stick with just crystal. And in fact, as a side note, this Tree of Life, it affects all heroes, so that includes the character himself. It's generally recommended that one of your characters in your party will have this Tree of Life enchantment, just because it affects everybody. So that pretty much covers the main enchantments that are commonly utilized. There is... I'm just going through them to see if there's another one. Aha! Breeze. So Breeze, again, it increases damage dealt by 10%, and after taking action, there's a 30% chance to increase the mobility by 2. And this enchantment lasts 1 turn. Breeze, I've actually seen it used on a lot of infantry characters, because infantry characters can only move 3 tiles. By having this proc, they can suddenly move 5 tiles. It's quite useful for, let's say, Elwin, who would struggle to get into melee range of enemies. And the additional damage boost always helps, of course. And then there's also Meteor, which is... Meteor is actually one of those which is better for bow characters. It increases the crit rate by 5%. So range characters like assassins and bow knights and so on would benefit more from Meteor. Because with those characters, you generally don't take any damage when you're attacking, and so just having the plus 20% additional damage dealt is useful. It's generally not recommended for melee characters, because melee characters will take damage. So in that case, you want things like Rough Sea that decrease the damage taken, or Full Moon that increases both the offense stat as well as the defense stat. So that covers Meteor. And is there any other enchantment I haven't touched? Blazing Sun. Again, Blazing Sun is kind of like Meteor. It's for ranged characters, especially characters that crit a lot. So, for example, crit damage plus 20%, that means it's a character that I don't think anyone's really built up yet, but for example, Kirikaze, his talent increases the crit rate, and yeah. So with his talent increasing crit rate, he has a very high chance of applying crits. So that means that he's one of those characters that is very, very good with that enchantment. And I think that pretty much covers all the enchantments that are available. I'm just going to double check first and bring up the enchantment screen one last time. So Meteor and Blazing Sun are both for ranged characters or characters who do a lot of crit hits. We've covered Full Moon, we've talked about Crystal, we've talked about Clocks, we've talked about Rough Sea, we've talked about Ice, which is for tanks, we've talked about Magic, of course, and we've talked about Hard Rock. So that covers all the enchantments. There's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 of them it looks like. And yeah, most of them just fall into very specific categories, and it's pretty straightforward. The ones that are just the ones that you really need to think about is Tree of Life, who you give it to, and whether you give and then of course whether infantry should get Breeze or they should get Full Moon, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, everybody, and if you have any questions, again, you can leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer to the best of my ability. Nitro out.